So any objections to starting 30 seconds early? Go for it. Welcome. Final day of the symposium, one of the final sessions. So thank you all for showing up here and being a part of this. We're appreciative of that. My name is Fatma Zahra. I'm from the National Network for Safe Communities. I lead our intimate partner violence work, including the intimate partner violence intervention, which is one of the strategies that's part of the STRIVE initiative here. And I have my wonderful colleague, Katie. I'll let you introduce.
Great. Can everyone hear us in the back? Are you able to hear? No, not at all.
No?
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Can you hear? Okay, has to be a little closer.
Yeah.
It's going to be weird. Okay. Hi, my name is Katie Collins. I'm with Allegheny County, which is in Pennsylvania. I'll point down a map in a second. It's the city of Pittsburgh. And we've been working with National Network on intimate partner violence strategies and this intersection. So really excited to be up here to share that work with you guys.
So last year, we had the opportunity to present on this topic, where we identified what is community violence, what is intimate partner violence, and why does it matter to know that these two forms of violence can intersect, and why it's necessary to intervene. So today's presentation is about what we've done to actually intervene and disrupt that violence when those two serious forms of violence intersect. So a little bit about myself. I'm from the National Network for Safe Communities. We are an action research, a lot of stuff going on back there. We are an action research center out of John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and we work with cities globally to implement proven violence reduction strategies. And what we do is we work to reduce violence, improve public safety, and we do this in partnership. We do this in partnership with law enforcement and with communities. And the goals of all our strategies at the National Network for Safe Communities is really being able to minimize arrest, minimize incarceration, strengthen communities, and also enhance legitimacy. Katie, I'll let you talk a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So we have our little map here, in case you're unfamiliar. So I'm from Allegheny County, as I mentioned. I'm from our Department of Human Services. So Allegheny County is in the western part of Pennsylvania, includes the city of Pittsburgh, which is in the center of the county. And so we have a kind of a mix. It's an interesting, we have about 1.2 million residents in the county, and it's an interesting mix where we have an urban center, and then we also have suburban areas and some really rural areas and really post-industrial areas where we have kind of former steel mill towns that have been disinvested in. So there's a whole variety of different populations that we're working with in the county. And so our human services, we operate most of the social services in the county. So that's our child welfare system, our homeless system. We oversee our publicly funded behavioral health system. And many of our clients, a lot of our clients intersect with our criminal justice system. And so we work really closely with that system as well. And we'll talk about what we're doing here. And so we have, just kind of give you an idea of the size. We have about $1 billion budget. And most of our work is done through community-based organizations. So we work really closely with those folks. So that's a little bit about who we are.
Thanks, Katie. So I'm guessing we probably have a mixed audience. We probably have folks from the intimate partner violence field and also the community violence field. And this might be new to folks, so I wanted to start off with a baseline of what these two terms mean and the impact of it. So community violence is violence that's often assaults or shootings that take place in public that involve people that are not related to each other, but may be or may not be known to each other. So community violence is something that can impact anyone and all communities, but what we see from research is that it really impacts youth at very high rates. Individuals between the ages of 10 to 34 are more likely to experience community violence, either being shot, killed, or witnessing that violence. And what we also see is community violence again, it might impact many different communities. It is disproportionate and impacts Black and Latino communities at higher rates. We also know that community violence can be lethal. Homicide is the second leading cause of death for children between the ages of 10 and 24. And for young adults between the ages of 25 to 34, it's the third leading cause of death. As for intimate partner violence, we are specifically talking about violence that happens between current or former intimate partners. And the violence that gets experienced could be related to physical, mental, sexual, financial abuse. And again, we're focusing very much on intimate partner violence and that relationship. I think sometimes we might use the terminology domestic violence, but for the purposes of this presentation and the work that we're doing, it's very much focused on current and former intimate partners. So we know intimate partner violence can happen to anyone regardless of race, age, socioeconomic status, but it does disproportionately affect women. And it disproportionately affect marginalized women. We see the impact of intimate partner violence can be a range of serious physical violence. It can be a huge toll that's being taken on mental health. And it can also be violence that leads to serious injuries or even death. What we know in the US is that 20% of the homicides are actually intimate partner violence related. And 50% of the women that are killed in homicides were killed by a current or former intimate partner. So this kind of lays out why these two forms of violence are so serious and why there's such a necessity to intervene, especially when they overlap and intersect.
So why do this in Allegheny County is the title of the slide. What makes Allegheny County unique? There's a few things I think to talk about and touch on. One, we are pretty well known for having really robust data infrastructure and technology infrastructure that we've had for many years now. And it's not necessary to do this work, but it allows us to see these intersections to better understand what's happening. We have this integrated data system that allows us to look across our systems and see, for example, that 1 in 3 of our child welfare cases have intimate partner violence there that are related there. See that 60% of the folks in jail also use human services. So it allows us to really see these intersections so we can think about how do we intervene and who should be at the table when we're thinking about these interventions. I also would mention that, sometimes people say, why is the human services folks at the center here? We can offer both the technology and data, but we also have the resources. We're the largest funder in our region and can bring those kind of resources to bear for many of these interventions that we're talking about. In terms of community violence and IPV in the county, we've had a long history with GBI. Many years ago, we brought NNSC to the county. Our police in front of our police department, we brought David Kennedy, and everyone said, why are you bringing this hippie to us? and kind of dismissed it. And we've made huge progress since then to really to kind of work with our police to implement at least a version of GBI within our city. That is outreach workers, a robust group of outreach workers that work really closely with our police departments in the city and are out in the communities interacting with folks. In terms of, we also DHS in the last few years, so kind of with COVID money and as a result of increasing violence, we made a huge investment in community-based violence intervention programs. So since about 2001, we've implemented Cure Violence, which is a public health-based approach to violence reduction at very targeted areas throughout the county. So our county is very fragmented. We have over 100 police departments in the county, so it's challenging sometimes to get things off the ground. And so for our community-based violence intervention programs, we wanted to be really targeted and use data to identify the particular communities we wanted to focus on. And so for all of our community-based violence intervention programs, we focused in those areas. And that includes As I mentioned, CURE, READY, which is a Chicago-based supported employment program. We call it, cognitive behavioral therapy masked as supported employment. So it's really kind of relentless engagement with the people that are at the kind of highest risk to try to engage them and break the cycle of violence. And then Becoming a Man, which is our more prevention strategies that we have in our schools, all in those same communities. And then in terms of IPV, we've had many years of working in this space. Our district attorney took leadership many years ago to create a task force. We have within our city police a domestic violence unit that is targeted and dedicated to domestic violence. And then we've really, in the last few years, come together to create a task force that includes our executive, county executive, the mayor, and really focus on IPV. What can we do as a community to address this issue? And really is focusing about collaboration across all of our systems.
Thank you, Katie.
Yep, sure.
So Katie covered a lot about the history. We were there in the early 2000s to implement GVI. We came back again in 2014 through the National Initiative for Community Trust and Justice. And through that initiative, the National Network for Safe Communities had the opportunity to support Pittsburgh, which is the largest city in Allegheny County, with implementing a police community framework, reconciliation framework. And in addition to doing that, we were also able to support Pittsburgh, again, with implementing the group violence intervention, which is GVI. Now, current work, fast forwarding to 2021, soon after the pandemic, we had the opportunity to get in contact with Katie and Katie's agency to address a couple of pressing violence issues. There was, a lot of violence happening in downtown Pittsburgh, and, DHS wanted some assistance to be able to support that work. Who's driving the violence in downtown Pittsburgh? How can we intervene? That work is really centered around addressing fentanyl use. In addition to that downtown work that's been happening, we've also been supporting the intimate partner violence work as well. During the pandemic, like many places globally, there was a spike in intimate partner violence, particularly intimate partner violence homicides. So we had an opportunity to work with Katie and work with her team to talk a little bit about the intimate partner violence intervention, which we're known for. So the intimate partner violence intervention, IPVI for short, I will keep this very short. It is a strategy that we use that is offender-focused but very much victim-centered. And through this strategy, a multidisciplinary team comes together to address different levels of IPV offending, and they do it by tailoring a response. That response is related to messaging and notification, and for individuals that are causing that harm, the offenders, if they continue to reoffend with their intimate partner violence behavior, there are enhanced consequences and attention and intervention given to them. So IPVI, traditionally we have 4 different tiers because we are addressing so many different levels and layers of intimate partner violence. So as you can imagine, when we started talking with Katie and her team, Allegheny County, over 1 million people, over 100 law enforcement agencies. This might be a challenge to do. So we had a lot of, honest conversations of what's going to be practical, what's going to be sustainable, and what's going to be effective. And part of doing that was really being able to first start with doing a retrospective IPV fatality review. To get an understanding of who those most dangerous and concerning individuals were in Allegheny County that were causing intimate partner violence harm. As a result of that review, we had the chance to work with Katie and her team in building a high-risk team. Now, this high-risk team is very much focused on the individuals causing harm. The team was getting together to talk about who are these individuals, and how can we intervene to stop the violence? There is obviously a approach where we're also addressing victim survivors, their safety needs, connecting them to resources and services, and giving them real-time information of what's going on. But the focus was really about those individuals causing harm. How to identify what is high risk in Allegheny County, we worked to actually develop a criteria. This criteria was informed by evidence-based lethality factors, but it's very much data-driven by what's happening in Allegheny County, looking at the serious offenses, and it was very much practitioner-informed too. So the high-risk criteria that Allegheny County created was specific to who were going to be the most concerning and dangerous individuals that we need to give our attention to, because this is going to be a multidisciplinary approach. And we want to focus on how do we stop these individuals from reoffending. So that criteria was developed. And after the criteria was developed and we are flagging who these high-risk cases are, we're developing messaging and notifications. It's another way of intervening and disrupting intimate partner violence, right? Some of these individuals have never had, communication that IPV is wrong, that it's not acceptable, that IPV, is illegal, it's against the law. And it was also an opportunity to give them information about help and resources to stop that behavior as well. Now, the team that works with Katie, the multidisciplinary team, is made up of DHS. You've got the DA's office, you've got Pittsburgh Police, you also have probation, pretrial services, and victim advocates together, all conferencing every week. Who are these high-risk individuals meeting the criteria, and how do we stop them? And again, the services piece is important to just note, because I think sometimes we think when we're working in the criminal justice system, it has to be, just a restraining order, just an order of protection, perhaps incarceration. But this team has an opportunity to information share in a very deep way. What do we know about this person causing harm? What is their, other criminal legal exposures? What do we know about what they are struggling with? What will help them stop abusing their partner? Is it that they don't have permanent housing? Perhaps it's DHS that can support them with getting information about housing and services so they're separated from the victim survivor and can stop their offending as well. And the services piece, again, it's parallel. We're not leaving victim services out either. Victim survivors are getting information in real time from victim advocates about what needs to happen, what's happening with the high-risk cases, and how they can continue supporting them in the process. Now, in these intensive conversations, when we're looking at the person that's causing the harm, part of what came out was these high-risk individuals, they weren't just committing intimate partner violence. Some of them had connections to community violence as well. So they were high risk for multiple reasons, for harming their partner and also having connections to causing harms with other groups or gangs or just larger in the community. So that presented an opportunity to figure out how do we intervene and what could we possibly do. Looking at the national landscape of community violence and intimate partner violence, there's an overlap, there's an intersection. I think a lot of practitioners, and maybe all of you can even say that, anecdotally, this overlap exists, it happens. But it's hard to pinpoint actual research around it. Believe me, we've tried looking into the research and it's been very limited. What we had an opportunity to do through the work we're doing from the national network, we had an opportunity to analyze fatal and non-fatal shooting data from 43 different jurisdictions all across the US. And from that data about regarding fatal and non-fatal shootings, we saw that 9% of those cases were intimate partner violence related. We also saw from that same pool of data that for the community violence cases, 5% were related to intimate partner violence. The biggest surprise and finding was, even if the 5% seems small, like these community violence incidents where, there's just a little bit of IPV contact, we saw that community violence had a huge impact on intimate partner violence. Of all the IPV cases that were looked at, 25% had someone connected to community violence. 25% is a huge statistic. And it's important because it helps pinpoint that this is an extreme risk population, and we can't just ignore it. We have to do something.
Yeah, and I want to mention, so as we were developing in Allegheny County kind of our strategy around intimate partner violence with the national network, we were, in parallel investing in a bunch of community violence interruption strategies. And we intentionally wanted to keep them separate, at least initially, because there's unique characteristics around both, and we wanted to implement the best practices. But we were talking to each other, and so as Fatma was saying, as we're looking at in intimate partner violence, high-risk reviews, we're seeing flags for community violence. We're talking to our partners that are looking at doing our shooting reviews and homicide reviews on the community violence side, and they're seeing tons of flags for intimate partner violence. And so it keeps coming up that there's just this kind of pervasive issue that they're seeing on their side. And so it was one of the impetuses to say, let's start looking at this data and figure out what we can collectively do. And so in Allegheny County, these are some high-level statistics. But when we look at, as Fatma was mentioning, domestic violence is hugely pervasive. We have more than 80 calls to 911 in our county every day for domestic violence. It's one of our most common calls. It can be incredibly dangerous for law enforcement that are going out to these calls, for the folks that are involved. There was just a shooting with officers just yesterday in York County. That was a response to an IPV, or at least it seems like an IPV situation. In our county, more than 15 years ago or so, there was a response where 3 officers were killed to a domestic violence call, and it was one of the impetuses for us to really start trying to deal with this. It was in 2009 to kind of start to think about how do we, as a collective, deal with intimate partner violence. So it's incredibly dangerous for all parties during these calls. So what we see is very pervasive throughout every area of our county. We see domestic violence calls. And during COVID, when we saw dips to 911 for every other type of call, we didn't see the dips in domestic violence calls. They continued. You'll see 2020. There's no our normal COVID dips where we see it. We don't see that here. And so though it is incredibly pervasive, it's also geographically concentrated and disproportionate in our county. And so when we look at these are maps of Allegheny County, hotspot maps of homicides and shootings on the left, and calls for domestic violence on the right. And the darker red are our hotspots. And you see that we see the areas where community violence is happening, or homicides and shootings are really one-to-one with where we see really concentrated calls for domestic violence. So certain communities are disproportionately impacted by violence in general. And it's not just communities, it's very targeted. These are address-based, so it's hyper-localized. And so when we start to think about strategies, these are similar communities where we're both working in. We also see in Allegheny County that, and everywhere, that the most serious harm in intimate partner violence disproportionately impacts our Black residents, both men and women. So I think this was a little surprising for us when we started to look at the data, is we expected women to be disproportionately impacted, but men are as well. And so Black men are 7 times more likely to be victims of intimate partner homicide than white women. And these are complicated situations when you have to look underneath to see, the relationships between the parties. Some of these might be retaliatory. Some of them might be where it's a traditional IPV relationship. But regardless, it's disproportionately impacting some of our community members. And then the overlap, as Fatma was saying, nationally, and we're seeing the same thing locally, about less than 10% of our homicides in Allegheny County are intimate partner violence related, but 25% of them have a history of IPV. And what we see is that for those folks that have that history, it's the bigger circle, they're really proximate. The IPV is really proximate to the homicide. So within 6 months, they're becoming known to our system for IPV 6 months before that homicide. And so this could be where folks, where the IPV is the action that's potentially generating a retaliation, a brother retaliating to the sister's boyfriend, things like that. It could also be where escalating violence in the community is also escalating in the home. And so we see this kind of interrelationship, and it also tells us that we could intervene at lots of different points to potentially stop violence. And it doesn't have to be only in the community, it could potentially be in the home. And so when we start to think about strategies, that's one of the things that we're thinking about. Oh, and then our most recent homicide review in 2024, what we found was that 40% of the folks that were engaged in these IPV homicides were young, were 18 to 24. And unlike previous years, every single one of them involved a firearm. And for many of these situations, there weren't necessarily history of PFAs or IPV charges. There was a lot of complications, not necessarily calls for 911. Lots of folks don't want to call our formal systems in many of these communities for real reasons of distrust and historic harms. And so there's it's unclear if there's a pattern of IPV in some of these relationships, or if it's people that use violence to solve problems. So lots of complicated interactions that are happening for the IPV homicides that kind of are similar to what we see in community violence as well.
So thank you, Katie, for that. And I think it's important that we're not just, again, anecdotally saying that, oh, this overlap, this intersection exists. There are numbers to point towards that too. There are numbers to also say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to come up with an approach and intervene in a more unified way. So I wanted to talk about the approach that we're using here in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. We're again, focused on those individuals that are causing the harm. And the reason why I keep coming back to this piece is because it's about shifting the burden off the victim survivor, right? It's about what are we going to do as systems, as agencies, as community members to stop the violence, but not put that pressure on the victim survivor to make those decisions or those movements. What can we do as a multidisciplinary team to address, intervene, and disrupt that violence? Now, the focus for developing this approach in Allegheny County was going to come from the high-risk review. And this high-risk review team is really a new innovative and modified version of IPVI, which I kind of gave you a brief overview of. Because Allegheny County is able to identify the most serious and concerning high-risk individuals causing IPV harm, and because their multidisciplinary team is able to also help flag if this person might be community violence engaged as well, it made sense that the referrals for this new approach come from this high-risk review team. So they understand that the individual is causing IPV harm and also has some connection to community violence. And the reason why that's important is because separately, both forms of violence are very dangerous because both also have access to firearms. When you combine it together, the risk is just exponentially higher for that victim survivor. So again, we have all this good information. We want to use that information to intervene in a new way. So we're focusing on the individuals causing harm. We're also thinking about them too, right? Our work is about keeping victim survivors safe, disrupting that violence, but it's also keeping that abusive partner safe too. As a community, we want everyone safe. We don't want anyone shot. We don't want anyone killed. We want everyone safe. And part of what Katie was mentioning before, retaliatory violence is real. You have a lot of victim survivors that may not want to engage with mainstream agencies. They may not want to connect with DHS for services. They may instead want to go to a family member or a friend who might have community violence ties, and this is not true for all situations, but they may want to go there to get their assistance and help to stop the violence. And that assistance and help may not always be the right path and way to disrupt that violence. So again, it's about safety for the victim survivor, but it's also safety for that abusive partner as well. All of this work, again, still very much victim-centered. There's that parallel piece. Victim Services is actively part of this high-risk team. They are still able to contact victim survivors, let them know what's going on, get them connected to services, and when they have permission to do so, the victim service agencies are able to share information at these high-risk reviews of, you might want to consider this about this person. Here's some intel that I'm giving you permission to share with a larger group of how you can potentially stop the violence. And it's helpful information because we wouldn't necessarily know that without the victim survivor giving permission to share that. So in designing an approach, we have to come from a place of trust. We're working with two different violence prevention fields. We have intimate partner violence, we have community violence. In Allegheny County, the work that the intimate partner violence practitioners do is phenomenal. And the work that the community violence practitioners do, it's phenomenal. But historically speaking, they have not worked together. And this was a new way, a new approach to bring them together. And I think in the IPV world, we know that bringing on more partners can be beneficial. And it just hasn't been thought of how we engage violence interrupters, who are those credible messengers doing community violence work, could be engaged to disrupt IPV as well. So we had to establish trust. And in order to establish trust, it was about making sure that both fields had an opportunity to understand the different forms of violence. So if we don't speak the same language and have the same terminology, we can't build a strategy. And if we don't have a comprehension of what community violence looks like or what IPV looks like, we can't reduce violence. And if we don't understand the specific barriers that victim survivors experience because there's also community violence happening as well, we can't take the appropriate safety measures as either. So we had to get both sides in the room together, or at least learn about each other. So not completely yet. So they're learning about each other. Some of the work that happened were these learning workshops and opportunities last fall. The IPV advocates in Allegheny County had a chance to get a workshop on what community violence is. They got to hear from several practitioners in the community violence field as well of how they're seeing IPV show up in Allegheny County. Similarly, violence interrupters and support and outreach, those working in the community violence field, also received a workshop on what intimate partner violence is. And they also got to hear from IPV practitioners of what comes up. So those were like the larger, bigger meetings that took place, but Katie and her wonderful team took it on the road to do more broader outreach.
Yeah, so as Fatma mentioned, initially we did these workshops with our leadership, so the folks that were running our community-based community violence organizations in the communities. And we have 4 victim advocates in the county, 4 different organizations. So we brought all of those folks together, and which was a good first step. But all of the folks, particularly the folks that were working in our community violence space, said you have to go out and actually talk to the folks that are working on the ground. That's absolutely essential. And so we went out to each one. So all of our regional areas, so in the communities, we went and met with all of our violence interrupters. And the purpose was a few things, kind of exactly what Fatma was mentioning. First, just kind of creating a bit of a common language. This is what IPV is, because a lot of them didn't have that kind of baseline information. But probably more importantly were the other two, which was one, just a listening session about what they're seeing in both in the everyday work that they're doing when they're trying to interrupt violence in the communities, but just in their community in general. And we heard so many interesting things. And we broke them out into little groups and really had kind of deep listening sessions with them. And then finally we brought our victim advocates out with us to start to put names and faces. Our violence interrupters really operate on relationships and trust. And when they don't have a name, when they don't have a number to call, you can't just give them call Women's Center and Shelter. That's not something that will resonate with them. And so we wanted to start to bring folks out into the communities so that they have both resources. Here's at least a number you can call. Here's a person that you can call, and just a bit of a better understanding of the resources that victim advocates and victim services can offer to the folks that they might come in contact with. So that was the purpose, and we went out to each one of those, and we'll talk about what we kind of heard. Okay, so it's interesting, as Fatma mentioned, these are groups that have not traditionally talked to one another, worked with one another. On the victim advocate side, initially there was kind of concern that focusing on the person using harm was going to strip away accountability for that person, that we're giving people a pass, that we're just helping them, but they're the person causing harm. And so we had to work with them really closely to kind of get them to the realization that, number one, that these are community members and these are folks that are coming back into the community, and we need to figure out what we can do to support not removing accountability for their actions, but what can we do to deter that future violence. Often what we're hearing, if we wanted to be truly victim focused, is the people that are victim survivors in these relationships just want the violence to stop. They don't necessarily want that person to go away to jail for it could be the father of their children, could be somebody that they've known for a long time. They just want the violence to stop. So what can we do to support that person? So that was it's still but starting to change a perception in our victim advocate community. We also know that for the victim advocates, most of them are not representative of the communities that are most impacted by this violence. So there's kind of hotspot areas. What we see in our victim advocates are people that look like me, and they're not in the community. They don't have those relationships in these communities, and so they don't quite understand how to interact with these individuals. And those individuals are not calling them. Those are not the people that are reaching out for their assistance. And so there's this disconnect. And then finally, in general, I think for the victim advocates, they're so focused on the victim, there's sometimes this limitation on how much they want to know about the person using harm. They're not used to interacting with that person, thinking about what they could do to offer to pause that violence. And so that's a theme that keeps coming up with this group. I think it was on our violence interrupters. So during our kind of listening sessions, there's lots of interesting things that come up here. And this group predominantly is young men, young Black men, not only, but mostly men, young men. And so there's both kind of an interesting both gender dynamic that's happening with these two groups too. So when we talk to them, there's really a spectrum of understanding of IPV. Some folks understand it. Some folks have seen it but can't quite name it. We also heard a lot of folks. A lot of information came out about men as victims that what they see often when they're coming in is kind of violent relationships on both sides. And so they have, in these communities, have seen when they have seen women being violent against men, men being violent back, and in the past, calls to 911 being weaponized against men in certain communities. And so that was one of the perceptions that they had, in addition to men kind of legitimately as victims not being comfortable reaching out for help because of all of the kind of neighborhood factors in addition to the system factors that kind of limited their ability to reach out. So that was a theme that came out that we don't hear very often, and we wanted to kind of raise up. We also heard from them that what they see in their communities is not necessarily the kind of television picture of what IPV dynamics looks like. They see really violent relationships, complicated relationships, people that use violence to solve problems, but not necessarily always that traditional power and control. That's not what they see. And so when victim advocates might train them, it doesn't resonate necessarily with what they're seeing on the ground about how to pause this violence. And so that kind of interaction and understanding what they're actually seeing is important when we start to think about how do we interrupt. And then we also heard a lot from them in almost every session, really a burnout. Almost everyone, at least one person per session said, I had a situation where I tried to intervene with somebody that was experiencing IPV. I brought them out of the situation, I connected them to resources, and then they just went back. And so I can't do this again. I don't know what to do here. And so I think that was really important to bring victim advocates there because they could help to dispel some of those myths about we have to meet people where they are, be there if and when they need anything, and really speaking a little bit more of the language of the community violence interrupters of saying, we're gonna meet you wherever you are in your journey, and we're gonna be a resource so that we can help pause this violence or stop this violence. And finally, I think what we wanted to stress, and we heard from them, was we're not expecting community violence interrupters to be victim advocates in that traditional sense, nor the vice versa. We want people to be experts in what they're doing, and we don't expect people to be an expert in intimate partner violence dynamics, but we want folks to both kind of know who to call and have a toolbox so that they can recognize situations and then work together to figure out what are safe ways that we might design strategies if and when you encounter IPV in the community.
Thanks, Katie. I'm going to go through this slide very quickly so we have time to do questions as well. So some of the commonalities with both groups, what we learned was oftentimes those working in both fields had their own experiences with violence. And that impacted, how well they were able to advocate for their clients, either IPV victim advocates or for community violence clients. So that was a commonality. The larger commonality we also saw with experience to violence is violence interrupters shared both directly and indirectly their own personal histories with IPV as well. So that was a very common theme, speaks to how pervasive intimate partner violence is. And even though that theme was there, that connection was there, there was still distrust. There's still a lack of distrust for all the reasons that Katie named. But both sides still knew they had to do something together. Didn't know necessarily exactly how. They knew that this population needed a specific intervention, but it needed to come from a credible messenger. There needed to be credibility in how they were reaching victim survivors that fell under this intersection, and also for people causing harm that fell into this intersection. So they both had this common desire to do that, and the common desire to also reduce violence. They all want to have communities that are safe. They may not know how to work with each other, but thinking about ways to get to know each other is a pathway to building those next steps. And they've committed to building new relationships. They're having conversations around that. So part of what we did was develop some messaging, again, taking referrals from the high-risk team, and did the pilot out of Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh was centralized with most of the resources, and it had been doing the IPV high-risk review so well. What was also identified is, again, we're focused on the person causing harm. The messengers for them should be the violence interrupters. And we want to make sure that the violence interrupters, when they're intervening with these individuals, their message about IPV is clear, it's simple, and direct about what happens if you continue to reoffend. And that's something that was slowly developed. So there is initial language, there is initial messaging around that. And all of this is tied to safety. So even though we can have great ideas of what we want to say to individuals, we can't do it without considering safety. And safety is tied to all these different groups: victim survivors, violence interrupters, and for individuals causing harm. We want to make sure that the messaging is messaging that doesn't put the burden on the victim. It doesn't implicate the victim in saying that, oh, we're coming out here to talk to you because he or she told us to talk to you. This is coming from the partnership. We want to consider the safety of violence interrupters. As Katie mentioned, we see law enforcement, they're at risk when they're intervening with IPV issues. And the same is true for violence interrupters as well. They are intervening, they're part of the communities. And the work that they're doing on IPV now, that's budding at the moment, it's not something that they traditionally do. We want to make sure that they continue to have credibility in doing the community violence work and also not put themselves in danger for talking about things that are still unfortunately considered a private matter and not something that's considered general violence for a lot of individuals. And again, we want to protect people, the individuals causing harm too. We don't want them to reoffend. We want them to have the right information. We want them to have the right resources to stop the offending. The partnership will stop them if they continue to reoffend. But this is about making safer communities and making sure that IPV violence isn't used. We're, in the coming weeks, going to be getting feedback from the violence interrupters about what the message, how the messaging is going and how it's landing or not. So that's something that we're looking at. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this strategy, we've been working on it for about a year, and so I think our initial outcomes are what we are hoping for, which are some basic. We want, number one, to build bridges across these organizations and these entities and these groups. We want to start creating shared language, shared relationships where that's appropriate. And really thinking about some basic, where can we start to see these interactions and this intersection of IPV and community violence? And so during the high-risk reviews, identifying what are kind of common things that are the factors that would indicate that community violence might be at play. Some of that is our police partners saying it is, this person's known as somebody that's using community violence. And others, it's just there's a history that indicates that potentially this is something, and we can reach out. Our violence interrupters just know their communities so well. They're amazing. And so even if that person might not be engaged in community violence, they also know that person in the community. And so there's other interventions that they could be, they're credible messengers for a reason. And really thinking about increased collaboration. This is what I was mentioning before, thinking about both the giving our violence interrupters and our victim advocates, but the kind of connections across the aisle. So if and when they encounter those situations, they have a 24-hour hotline that they can call, both the person that they're interacting with and also for themselves. If a violence interrupter just doesn't know what to do with the situation, they have somebody they can call 24 hours a day that is willing, that can take their call and can walk them through some options around safety planning for themselves and for the people that they're interacting with. And then just creation of messaging. What are the standards, as Fatma was saying, that's clear, simple. We don't need to give our violence interrupters a ton of information. It's really just what are the 2 or 3 lines that we want them to say every time when they're going out and trying to communicate, and so that they have a baseline of what kinds of information to say that can hopefully pause and stop that violence.
That transitions so nicely into our last slide.
Yes, sir. So our next steps, are you were you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So really trying to cement the language that we have. So more and more we're trying to just, we have so many partners that are going out and delivering messaging. That includes our violence interrupters, but it also includes our pretrial services, our human services. And so cementing the language that is consistent, that is across all of our partners. So we're working on doing that. I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, and we're also looking to figure out how can we layer in more talking points and think about other interventions as well. So when you're creating a new approach, or you're creating a new strategy, you start small, and as you develop more fluency and confidence, you can layer in other pieces. What else can violence interrupters say that feels a little stronger, that feels like it can be a little bit more encouraging for people to get the message? IPV is not going to be tolerated, just like community violence is not going to be tolerated. IPV is not going to be tolerated in the neighborhood either. So those are some of the things that we're looking to think about with regards to messaging, as well as when and where the messaging happens. So again, it's not just about the words, it's about how it's delivered and how it happens and where it happens. And that goes to doing more trainings. So all these individuals had the opportunity, all these different practitioners had the opportunity to get this training on what community violence is, what IPV is, but we need to do a next step. What do you do when you're actually delivering that message, right? You don't want it to be scripted, but you want to make sure, as Katie said, you're hitting certain points, but you want to make sure that you can have a conversation, because if that person is challenging you on something that you're giving the message on, you want to be prepared on what you can say and what feels safe to say as well. And like any good approach and strategy, we want to encourage Allegheny County to start instituting protocols and procedures. We want this to live on. We want this to be routinized. They have a phenomenal high-risk team. They're doing really fantastic work. And this is just another layer to that work. So we want to make sure that we're supporting Allegheny with that piece. Katie?
Yeah, and I think what we hear on the IPV side and definitely on the community violence side is the need for additional resources. So we want to make sure that folks have access to those things. And so one of the things that we're doing is really trying to expand out what that looks like. And that includes actually having resource specialists go and talk to the individual, that's the person that's causing harm, which is pretty, I mean, it's super new in our community. We have our public defender that's just asking for it. They're like, please talk to the person. And every single conversation that we've had with people that have caused harm has really revealed a much more whole picture of that person and what we could possibly do to stop and help that person to discontinue violence. And really thinking about partnerships outside of our common systems. And so as that's the violence intervention, but it's also, our early childhood program. So DHS really has these hands in lots of different places. Our child welfare system, there's tons of interactions that folks have, but also supports for victim services that include, early, especially for kind of new moms, new parents who are at much higher risk of IPV harm, to provide resources there. And then we're starting to think about what would the referrals from the other direction. So right now we're really focusing on from IPV high risk out to community violence. But these individuals are coming into contact, especially with folks that just don't want to, that have not traditionally wanted to interact with formal systems. And so is there another kind of other directional way that we could be collectively working with folks that are most at risk? Because they're encountering folks that are very high risk for IPV harm that aren't coming to our formal systems. And so another resource, another way to think about that is something we're working on now.
So we're going to go to questions and answers. Thank you. I know we talked a lot, we shared a lot. We're happy to answer questions and can even stay later.
What is DHS? Is that your Department of Social Services?
Yeah, it's our human services,
So,
yeah.
Human services. So that's like what would be what the CBS goes through or no?
Yes.
Okay, so have you had any issues with them being a part of your high-risk team?
So they don't sit on our weekly calls, but since we're DHS, we do outreach to them and have side conversations with them about messaging, especially with folks that are coming into our like a lot of the times these are either open referrals that are happening at the time of that incident, or there's an active case, and so we're reaching out and having them deliver messaging.
So you haven't had any conflict, like, because that's an issue that we're discussing now, so I was just seeing if there was that
Yeah.
come up.
It's come up recently of like, should we incorporate them into the high-risk calls? And so we haven't yet, but we're thinking about it and we're talking to them. Yeah, yeah.
I saw Fred's hand. Hi.
Super interesting, thank you. Can I put out two questions and just decide how to address them? When you said the stat that 25% of the IPD offenders were also involved in community violence, is that stat analyzing like retrospective for their life, their possible previous criminal history, or current contemporaneous with the IPD? And my other question is, I'm a prosecutor, I don't understand where the conversations are happening with the offender, and like, are they charged already? Where's their defense attorney? And in my county, just thinking about my defense bar, and the idea that somebody would approach an offender who's got a charged case, and they would be so worried that even if he or she was approached, that they might say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it anymore, that would be incriminating. I just don't understand, where is the conversation happening? Thank you.
Maybe I'll start with that one.
Yeah,
So it's interesting. So we have, for a long time, Department of Human Services have had resource specialists that sit in our lower court. So it is an arrest. The person has been arrested and charged with a crime, an IPV crime, and they sit in our courts and have for 10 years or so. And their purpose in the past was if and when the judge said, hey, this person needs batterers intervention program, they're there to help sign them up. That was their traditional role. And so with this team, and the DA is a huge part of the team, so they sit on the team. What we're doing is our resource specialist, and we have a person that has worked in victim services for many years that is piloting this for us, is going out and talking. Before she talks to anybody, she talks to the judge, she talks to the prosecutor, she's talking to the attorney, and every one of our conversation, and we have a script, says, I'm not talking about this incident. We're not going to mention anything about this incident. I don't want to hear it. I want to talk about what you need. We want to, like it's a script. We want to help you, not become part of these situations anymore, to stop using violence. But I don't want to talk about, and each time I think the people have wanted to say, or not every time, but want to talk about the case, says, no, I don't want to talk about the case. We're talking about this. And so that's, it's worked fine right now. But, so yeah, that's how. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll share you the script. Yeah. We talk to them in court. Yeah, we have a central court for the city cases that happen, and there's domestic violence days, and so they go down there. But it's for the people that are coming up on the high risk team. So it's not everybody, but it's this select few. And each time she's going around and talking to everyone. Yeah, she's doing an amazing job.
And in addition to that piece, the resource specialists, pretrial services are an important partner in all of this because they're giving that criminal justice messaging. They're able to say, hey, you're on our radar. This is what IPV is. You haven't full order of protection in place. You need to stay away. So they're being very transparent and clear with that individual that reoffending could result in X, Y, and Z. So people are getting both formal messaging from a legal system as well as resource specialists too.
And when our resource specialist is going out, she's saying things like, I know that you talked to pretrial services the other day. I'm also here to help you. So it's tying that we're all talking to each other too, which is really impactful, I think.
And just to answer your question about the data, so that stat was pulled from just contemporary fatal and non-fatal shooting incidents. So it was just 25% of IPV cases related to community violence was analyzing the shooting data that they had, that we looked at 43 different jurisdictions across the country. Only shooting. So it's going to be higher, right? It's going to be higher because we know IPV involves aggravated assault, strangulation, And we also know a lot of people don't report as well. So I saw another hand.
We have both. No, we have scripts for everybody.
With Fred, is it the violence disruptors that are going out and being clear that behavior is that around the crime that they've been arrested on?
So we have scripts for every entity that might be going out, and it depends on the situation. For folks so for the resource specialists, it doesn't matter if they're engaged with community violence or anything. They're just going for the high-risk folks. They're going out, and especially in cases where there could be behavioral health issues or housing issues that we flag. That's a thing that go talk to that person. For the violence interrupters, we're giving them a referral saying this person's come to the attention. Here's a script, basic information. And then they're going out, and they might say like they're saying things like, hey, I know you got arrested, like, what can we do, like those kinds of because it is a public, it's not investigative, it's a public record that the person was arrested, so that's the kind of thing that they're saying.
And we'll take one last question. Yes.
I'm just curious what metrics you use to create like your list of like top offenders in the world.
Yeah, so we're using arrests, and so as Fatma was mentioning, we work with our partners that are on the ground, and there were kind of two main things that they flagged. One were people that they see all the time. So there's people that are repeat, and so we have one. It's that the person has been arrested for IPV crime 3 times in the last year, and so that flags them for the list. And the other is that it's a really serious incident, and so those are we have a list of charges, but it's felony ones in Allegheny County, attempted homicide, rape, strangulation, those types of crimes that rise them to the list. And then so what we do is that makes the list. It's the screening criteria, and we have conversations to say like, is this person really high risk? And in some cases we say, no, that's not what's happening here. But most of the time, there's confirmation from people that are the line staff that had the information on the ground for those individuals.
So it's like a data-driven, get them initiating a conversation
Yep.
and then a larger conversation.
Yep.
Yep.
And I'm going to brag on Allegheny County a little bit. It's impressive what they've been able to do, being this data-driven. They've already seen a 20% recidivism rate for these people that come on the high-risk review. And that's pretty impressive because these are the most serious and concerning individuals, and they're only seeing a 20% recidivism rate. Obviously, there could be many factors that people are not recidivating, but I think the extra attention, personalized, tailored intervention is making a huge deal in Allegheny County. Thank you for joining us.